Yo guys, what is going on? Lucky here and welcome to the first episode of Face Off Friday. This is a new kind of series where I will be comparing two tanks to each other to help you make a choice on what tank to pick. So please hit that like button if you think this series should be continued, or hit that dislike button if you think this series should not be continued. I'm very curious on what you guys think about it. So without further ado, let's get straight into the episode. Yo guys, what is going on? Lucky here and welcome to Face Off Friday. Today we are going to be comparing the IS-6 with his Chinese little brother, the 112. And yes, you heard that right, these two tanks are like brothers, because they are indeed very similar. But they have some key differences, and in this video I'm going through all these differences and eventually I'll tell you guys what tank is the best in my opinion. So, first up, the gun. And if you guys take a look right here, the guns are actually very similar. They both have a 122mm main armament, but as you guys can see, there are some differences. To start with, there's the DPM. The DPM of the 112 is 1848, but the DPM of the IS-6 is 2085. Well, that is of course a very big advantage for the IS-6, because that 200 extra DPM, it might not sound much, but in fact it can actually save you quite some times in the battlefield. Then next up, the penetration is exactly the same, just as the damage, also exactly the same. Module damage is also the same, but then, yeah, and here you see the DPM differences. The 112 fires 4.74 rounds a minute, where the IS-6 fires 5.35 rounds a minute, which makes the reload time of the 112 12.66 and of the IS-6 11.22. So that extra rate of fire is of course a very nice advantage that the IS-6 has. So it can just take out its opponents a little bit faster. Then, as I already told, caliber exactly the same. The shell velocity is actually 10 meters per second faster on the 112 than the IS-6. But 10 meters per second is so small you're barely gonna notice the difference in the battlefield. Then the maximum range is, as any tank, the same, 720 meters. And here's also a very nice thing about the 112. The 112 carries 50% extra ammunition over the IS-6, which is very nice indeed if you happen to be in a game where you really have to carry your balls off. So at least you do have the ammunition to do so in the 112. But instead, if you were in an IS-6, you might actually be struggling with those big carry games. Then next up, weapon handling stats. They are pretty much exactly the same up until the gun elevation, which the IS-6 has just 3 degrees more of. So gun wise, just because of that extra elevation and because of that extra DPM, I have to give this one to the IS-6. So, the mobility. To start off with, the 112 is 10 km per hour faster forwards and 1 km per hour faster backwards, which is really gonna help to move around the battlefield just a little bit quicker than the IS-6. Then the engine power, the 112 has 580 horsepower, where the IS-6 has 700. But as you guys can see right here, the IS-6 is also heavier, which means that this engine has to carry a lot more weight, which means that the speed will drop down, of course, a little bit. But you can see that way better if you go to the next stat, the horsepower per ton ratio. The 112 has 12.68, where the IS-6 has 13.67. Which actually means here that the IS-6 horsepower wise is just a little bit faster, but the 112 terrain resistances are just that little better than the IS-6, so it kind of compensates for the lack of engine power. Then the turret traverse is just about 2 degrees faster in the 112. It's not that much, so you're barely gonna notice anything on the battlefield. Then the tank traverse are exactly the same, and brake force, yeah, who the fuck cares about that, right? So mobility wise, this definitely has to go to the 112. Simply because it is just 10 km per hour faster, and you might say, well, the engine is weaker, but this kind of gets compensated by the better terrain resistances. Then we have reached probably one of the most important categories for these two tanks, that is the armor. So as you guys can see here, the armor on the 112 is 120 at the front, 120 at the side, and 60 at the rear, where the armor at the IS-6 is 100 at the front, 100 at the side, and 60 at the rear. Then the turret armor of the 112 is 240 at the front, to 130 at the side and 60 on the rear, where the turret armor on the IS-6 is 150 at the front, 150 at the side, and 100 on the rear. So just to understand the armor profiles of these tanks a bit better, we're gonna take a look at the live armor model. So to start with, here we have the armor model of the IS-6. And we are gonna look at from two different ways. We're gonna look at the armor while it's facing you frontally, like so. And we're gonna look at the armor when it is facing you at an angle. So to start with the IS-6, the front is 180, 160. Yeah, well, both of these tanks have preferential matchmaking. So just to take an example, the IS's gun has 175mm penetration, so it would be around a 50-50 if the IS-6's gun would shoot straight through this thing. But guns like the T-29's 105mm will have probably no problem batting the front plate of the IS-6, as long as they don't shoot right here, because this is a bit better armored. Then we have the very well angled cheeks, you can say them. This is these two at the front are both an auto bounce zone. Now if you take a look at the turret armor is okay at the sides. It does have some weaker points next to the gun mantlets. So if you encounter an IS-6, definitely try to shoot him right here, because you only need 155mm penetration. And if you take a look at the roof, there's a very small strip that you can overmatch if you have a gun that is 120mm plus. And of course you have these two cupolas, but they are very thin, so they are kind of tricky to hit. And then we have probably one of the most legendary weak spots on every heavy tank, that's the lower plate. But surprisingly, the lower plate of the IS-6 is pretty well armored. It has 120mm lower plate armor, and it is angled at a 57-degree angle. So yeah, most tier 7s and some tier 8s are actually gonna struggle shooting at the lower plate. So if you encounter one of these things, don't shoot in the lower plate, just shoot them right here, you should be fine. Now we are gonna take a look at the armor model of the 112. So here we are at the 112's armor model, and it looks actually already a bit nicer. A lot of red, which is always nice to see if you are the heavy tank driver. So let's get cracking. Alright, so the front plate is a very healthy 260 to 230mm of effective armor, which pretty much all tier 7 guns and about half of the tier 8 guns are gonna struggle shooting through it. Then if we take a look at the turret is much better than the IS-6. It doesn't have those weak points at the side of the gun mantlets. It does have some bigger cupolas though, but they are a bit better armored than the IS-6, about 170, 175. So the IS's gun will still kind of struggle to pen it reliably. And now we are at the most prominent weak spot of every heavy tank, the lower plate, which actually got buffed. A few patches ago, this lower plate used to have about 120mm of effective armor, which probably even most tier 6 tank would have no struggles penning it. But they buffed the crap out of it. The lower plate is now 140mm thick, which results in an effective armor thickness of about 200 when it is not angling, which is pretty nice, also considering this thing has preferential matchmaking, so it won't be meeting tier 10 tanks. So overall, frontally, when the tanks are not angling, I think the 112 is better. But now let's take a look at the tanks when they are angling. So here, if we take a look at the IS-6 angled probably about 45 degrees, you can see that the front plate has become a lot stronger, or about the 200 to 220 range, which is pretty nice. The lower plate has become even more impenetrable than before, to 240 to about 260mm, which is also really nice. Turrets pretty much stays the same. The sides are an auto bounce zone all around here. Also, if you shoot at the tracks, it will get absorbed or an auto ricochet, except for the area right here. You can kind of shoot through the tracks and still you're gonna need about 180mm penetration to do damage, of course. But here we have one of the worst points of the IS-6, you can say. Because of its very special armor angling and shape, it actually creates a weak spot when it angles, as you can see right here. So this plate then becomes a 170mm thick, probably, which is not so very good. But that is like the main weakness of this tank, because if you angle it like this becomes weak. If you angle like this becomes weak. If you angle like this becomes weak. So you always have weak armor on the IS-6, which isn't ideal. But now, if we take a look at the 112 angled at about 45 degrees, this is what you want to see in your tier 8 heavy tank. Look at all the red and purple. So to just start with, the front plate has become about 280 to 260 millimeters thick. Even most tier 10 guns are going to struggle panning that. Also, the lower plate has become 225 to 230 millimeters thick, which is also quite hard to pen for most tier 8s and tier 7s. Then if you take a look at the side, this is pretty much an auto bounce. This is an auto bounce because of the space armor. If you shoot through the tracks, it still has some decent armor. There is one tiny little weak spot right here of 180 millimeters, and maybe right here if you have a bit more penetration. And the turret is of course exactly the same. So overall, armor-wise, this definitely has to go to the 112. Because of its amazing lower plate buff and the fact that you can angle this tank very effectively makes this tank a whole lot better armor-wise than the IS-6. And then at last we are going to talk about some miscellaneous stats of the vehicle, like that the 112 has 50 less hit points than the IS-6, not such a big deal. Well, it can help you sometimes surviving that one last shot, but it is not such a big deal. And then we go to the view range. Actually, the 112 has 30 meters extra view range over the IS-6, which makes it actually a lot easier to spot for itself, because the IS-6 is pretty blind, which actually the 112 is still blind, but a bit less blind. But it can handle itself much better when it has to spot its own targets. Then the camo values, it doesn't give them for the IS-6, but I guess they're about the same because the tank profiles are also about the same. Then the battle tier, of course, tier 8 and 9. This thing also tier 8 and 9 because they both have preferential matchmaking. Then the radio range is 600 on the 112, 440 on the IS-6. It's really... The 112 has a much better radio range, because the 440 radio range on the IS-6 is very shit. It's actually quite comparable to most tier 4 or 5 tanks. Then the 112 has 3% less chance to get set on fire, which is always nice. So you might feel a little bit more comfortable taking premium food in your 112 than in your IS-6. And then the 112 is actually a little bit cheaper. I think this translates in about 3 to 4 euros. If I'm not mistaken. Then the shell cost is also exactly the same because of course you have exactly the same guns, or almost exactly the same guns. So miscellaneous wise, this also has to go to the 112. I mean, the only negative point about the 112 is that it has only 50 less hit points, but then again it has better view range, better radio range, less chance to be set on fire, and that actually counts a bit more heavier than those 50 extra hit points in my opinion. So that wraps it up for the on-paper stats. Now let's actually take a look at some gameplay of these two tier 8 monsters. So here we are inside of the IS-6, and as you guys may have already seen, we are playing on Ensk. And Ensk is a very small, very compact city map, which is actually the perfect environment for an IS-6. So this gameplay is going to show you guys exactly how the IS-6 can shine. So as you guys can see right here, the IS-6 is positioning itself inside of a corridor. And this is actually kind of the playstyle of an IS-6. Actually, basically what you have to do, you have to go up front where the heavies will encounter each other. You have to find a nice little corner and side scrape like a boss. And then probably this will happen. Yes, you guys saw that perfectly right. That was a 155mm T30 gun bouncing the side of an IS-6. Now let's take a look on where it actually hit. And yes, as you guys can see right here, the T30 just hit him straight into the side. And this also kind of shows you guys the amazing side armor the IS-6 gets. But if you guys look right here, the FCM actually manages to pen the IS-6. And let's take a look where that one hit. And yeah, there it is, right through the lower plate. And this shows you guys that you really have to watch out that you don't show your front towards the enemy when it is unangled. So right now just take a quick look at the mobility of the IS-6. It's going, let's see, 27, 29, 30, and this actually is on hard terrain. So It is not bad for a heavy tank, but it is certainly fast enough to flank a T-95, as we can see right here. And now one quick last thing before we're gonna take a look at the 112. Look at the reload of the IS-6. He's just putting round after round after round into these enemies. And this also sums up the amazing DPM of the IS-6, as you guys could see right there. So that was basically everything I wanted to show you guys about the IS-6 in real gameplay. Now let's switch over to the 112. So, and here we are, same map, different tank, different game mode. So let's see how the 112 performs on Misc. And by the way guys, I've just picked Misc just because it gives actually the best example for any heavy tank. So yeah, without further ado, let's see what this 112 makes of it. So right at the start you can see that this guy is not heading for the town. He is instead actually heading for the train tracks, which also gives great cover for heavy tanks, and it also has a very nice corridor for side scraping. So right here you can see that the 112 has some very amazing armor as well. And it is also very good at side scraping. As you can see right here, he is just bouncing every single shot of the T28 HTC and the Cromwell. So this is also still quite manageable by the IS-6. But now let's step a few more levels up. You will see what I mean in just a second. Well, and look right now at this, where the 112 has got himself into. He is basically doomed, as you can say actually from the first glance, because there are so many tanks around him. There's also a T-54 first prototype flanking him. Oh, this looks like a disaster. Let's see if the 112 can save itself out of this situation. So as you guys can see right here, what he's actually doing is very smart. He just keeps reversing because he knows there is a dead Cromwell behind him. So if he can get his front towards the rear of that Cromwell wreck, he pretty much increases his chance of survivability by a very large amount. But if you actually take a look right here, look at where all these shots are bouncing. That's basically the front plate, the lower plate. Actually, the only tank that is doing reliable damage to him is the T-54 Mod 1 who has its sight. If you were the IS-6, I don't believe the IS-6 would have stayed alive for this long. Simply because the IS-6 frontal armor just isn't that good when it's not angled. So for the further rest, actually as I already mentioned in the raw stats on the website, the 112 and the IS-6 are very similar. Well, except for the fact that the 112 has way better armor, just as I guys showed you a few seconds ago. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up all for the gameplay. Now let's get into the conclusion of today's Face Off Friday. So, conclusion. This was a very hard choice since both tanks are very similar to each other. But personally, in my opinion, I think the 112 is today's winner. Just because it has the best frontal armor, way better than the IS-6, and yeah, those minor gun disadvantages, I personally can live with that, because I rather have some beast armor instead of just a slightly better gun. So that wraps it up for today's episode. Let me know what you think about this series by liking or disliking the video. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.